Okay, so I'm Randy Kearns. I'm a professor over here at the University of New Orleans, teach healthcare management, and I've been to Putian University before the pandemic, and hopefully now that most of it is behind us, I'll be able to return in the not so distant future. But until that time, we're still stuck having to use Zoom. So that's what we have, and so that's what we'll do. It's certainly my honor to be back with you, and it's certainly a good opportunity for us to continue to work together. This is the first of 8 sessions. We'll have 3 this week. And each session, I will highlight 5 things you need to remember from the session, as well as key points during the presentation. And so, first of all, before I go any further, this is kind of our introduction course to healthcare management, and the key components of healthcare management are really rooted in the fundamentals of management and management science. And so a part of that comes from what we've been taught in organizational behavior. And so some of the key pieces that we'll talk about throughout this particular course includes key concepts of organizational behavior, specifically as they apply to healthcare management. Today, we'll talk about analytical and conceptual thinking. These are critical traits for any manager in the healthcare environment. Being able to understand and manage situations analytically certainly are important traits to being successful in healthcare leadership. So our 5 things for today. First of all, what is healthcare management? And then what are healthcare management competencies? I'll talk about those 8 key competencies. I'll talk primarily about competency number 1, which includes both the conceptual component and an analytic component. And then last but not least, a growth mindset. What does that mean, and how do we apply that to what we're trying to do and what we're trying to learn from, again, the foundational component of healthcare management. So the main part about this course is, again, just giving you a broad overview of what healthcare management really is. And it includes those social, ethnic, ethical, and patient care concepts of management. Again, we'll talk primarily of what's considered job competencies or key competencies for someone to be and certainly excel as a healthcare manager. And so a part of that takes us to the definition. We will talk throughout this course about the difference between leadership and management. Management is primarily the science side of what we do, how we do it, how we lead. Leadership is really something that you develop over time, and leadership is more of a social construct, how you interact with other people. Management, on the other hand, is more about the framework. Management is the science of professional leadership. With management science, we teach you in terms of leading, planning, organizing, coordinating, assessing. Those are the key words in the definition, but more than anything else, it's about how to, again, it's the science part of it. It's the things we write down, the structure that we use, the way that we do it. All of those things are core components of healthcare management. Again, later on, we'll talk about leadership. just understand that your organization can make you a manager, but it's how you interact with people that really move you into a leadership role. To be successful in any key position in an organization, you have to be able to master both. You have to be a good manager in terms of understanding boundaries, but you also have to be a good leader, which is more personal. There's more social skills and social interaction associated with that. But we do management first, and we develop leadership almost as an ongoing skill, as a part of our way in working through administrative processes down the road. So let's just use an example. This particular man is having a heart attack, and in our country, we dial 911 as our emergency contact number anywhere in the United States. One thing I also need to be sure and point out, I know a lot about healthcare here in the United States. A big part of what we do in teaching these courses, along with our partner there at Putian University, is to give you some insight into hopefully what we do well, and also to point out things that we don't do so well in our own healthcare system here in the United States. I can't really tell you a lot about the Chinese healthcare system because that's not my area of expertise. But what I can tell you about is the American system. And hopefully, as your system continues to grow and develop and evolve, and many of you become managers within that system, you can learn from things that we've done well and replicate them, and also learn from mistakes that we've made and hopefully avoid them. Anyway, I didn't mean to get off too much on that, but as I'm explaining something about that's somewhat unique to America, 911 is, I just returned from Ireland yesterday, I believe, no, Saturday. And in Ireland, they dial 911. I'm sorry, they dial 999. I know other countries, it's 113. The point is, whatever your emergency number is, obviously that's what you would call to activate the system. But all of that assumes some things. It assumes there's someone there to answer the call for the emergency. Do they have a preset number of questions to ask? And the answer is yes, they do. I used to manage one of those types of centers where people would call in who needed help. And so they collect information, they collect hopefully correct information. They typically are also the person that dispatches the ambulance to the man's location. In terms of finding the man's home that's having the heart attack, how do the paramedics know how to find the home? What type of training do those paramedics have? And are they equipped to save the man's life? A lot of years ago, many years ago, I used to work as one of those paramedics. And I used to, and then later I managed several very large EMS systems. An EMS system is one where all of the ambulances work within that system. And then, do the paramedics know what's the most appropriate hospital to transport the patient? In some communities, there's only one hospital, so that's the only option to go to. But in some communities, there are many hospitals. I live in New Orleans, and I live within less than 10 miles of 8 hospitals. I live within 5 miles of 2 very large hospitals. And so being sure that the paramedics know which is the best hospital to take me to for the condition that I may have is certainly important. And the best hospital to take me to is typically associated with what type of emergency room do they have, what type of staffing do they have there, or equipment do they have, are they ready to provide the care that I need, and then who's in charge, who's responsible for my care once I arrive at the hospital, and then in terms of what's next. Again, if I'm having a heart attack, the blood vessels that surround the heart. So the heart is really a big muscle, and within that muscle are chambers that collect blood and pump blood out. And that pumping of the blood throughout your body is a very important thing. And because it's such a big muscle, it has a lot of blood vessels around the big muscle. If one of those blood vessels become partially occluded, that's what leads to a heart attack. Well, we also know that if we can quickly get the patient to a cardiac catheterization lab, which is where they insert a guide wire up through an artery into the person's heart, they're able to work the guide wire into a blood vessel around the heart, and then destroy the clot that's there and reopen the blood vessel, thus saving the patient's life. But it is important for us to understand that that particular patient needs to get to a cardiac cath lab. That's why I get back to that earlier part about, do the paramedics know where's the best place for that type of care to be available? And the answer is yes, they do. But it takes all of these things working together. It takes the people answering the phone. It takes the paramedics responding to your home. It takes an efficient and effective emergency department. And then a hospital that has the services necessary for someone to have cardiac catheterization available to them is certainly essential as well. So all of the things then that happen to this patient from the time the patient first comes into the emergency department until the time that they're discharged from the hospital, there are literally dozens of people that will interact with that patient. There's lots of information that's collected on the emergency, electronic health record. There's a lot of information in terms of lab results, all of the things that they're doing to try and help this patient and try and take good care of them. Also means that there's a lot of information and a lot of things happening from what's considered door to discharge. Door to discharge is something that we look at for throughput times. And again, from a management science standpoint, that's something that we have to efficiently and effectively deal with. When we think about all of the things that have to happen, anywhere from medical records to supply chain to pieces that kind of go on in the background, like housekeeping, keeping the room clean, nutrition, being sure the person is appropriately fed a nutritious meal while they're there. How, the American model of healthcare, we have a variety number of payment systems that are used depending on, what the patient population comes from. But a part of that is, again, being sure that what the overall person's experience is in the hospital, it starts from start to finish, is one that's effective, where the person recovers from their illness or injury, but then also it's a good overall experience. But that also includes the billing of the service, being sure that that takes place. And there are all of these things that happen out in the open, but there are also things that happen that's somewhat transparent to the patient. we want to be sure all of those things happen in a positive way to help support the patient there. You know, more than anything else, for all of this to work together, there has to be a management of the process. Healthcare systems are in many cases very large. Healthcare itself is quite complex. And so really the scope of healthcare management is truly huge. It's really a major undertaking that many people have to deal with, have to work with, and have to operate effectively and efficiently for us to be able to continue to do the things that we're doing. You know, one of the things that we talk a lot about in the American model of healthcare is the right care the first time, being sure that all of the things that we're doing is coordinated, it's led, it's directed. All of these descriptive words help us understand all of the pieces that fit into managing a healthcare event, you know, and managing healthcare systems. Again, the right care the first time means that we've quickly and effectively identified what's wrong with the patient. We've taken those steps necessary to take care of the patient. And we've done the things necessary so that the patient can quickly recover from their injury or illness. So, you know, if we put all of this together, healthcare management really is that profession that does all of these things, leads, plans, organizes, coordinates, assesses, but all of the things that are necessary for those who are providing the care, the patient who's receiving the care, and those who interact with the patient all along the way from door to discharge time. You know, it's really an integral part of every healthcare organization in the U.S. In terms of the role of healthcare management. And it goes well beyond just those involved in the bedside of patient care. It goes much further into the administrative function, those involved in supply chain management, those supporting electronic health records. There are a lot of things that we do as healthcare managers that may be either patient-facing or not patient-facing behind the scene. But all of those things are certainly essential. You know, healthcare managers must be able to do many things. Again, whether it's directly involved in the clinical management, the practice management, in many cases, it's working behind the scenes. It's the financial aspect of it, or working with informatics. The most expensive investment a healthcare system will make today beyond their employees is their information system, the electronic health record. It's quite complex, but it's also interdependent on good information. And so being sure that we have a literate healthcare workforce that's inputting those data help us with clinical care, but it also supports things like supply chain, financial support, being sure that we bill appropriately for the services we provided. And then there are other things like community outreach and those mission critical teams within the healthcare organization. Other components in terms of health insurers or health policy and procedure, again, all of those are key parts to what we're doing. We've got to be sure we're compliant with the law, that we're practicing best practices. What are the outcomes of our clinical services, quality of care, what type of access to care do we have, and are we helping people gain access to care, and then constantly working to improve the quality of care that we provide. You know, again, it's important for people to know that, you know, at least here in the American model of healthcare, the future of it is really quite bright. There's always a challenge on the horizon. And so we have to be sure we have some of the smartest and most prepared healthcare managers leading some of these organizations, because it's a constant ebb and flow of how things change. Medical technology is constantly improving. Our ability to adapt to technology will be critical. Artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, those are technologies that will really, number one, make us much better, but at the same time, challenge us to think ethically about how do we use these technologies for the best for our patients. But again, a part of that is one of those foundational components of what we have to do as healthcare managers, and that's to decide. Because, you know, the consequence of all of this is to be sure that we do have a well-educated, well-trained workforce that's very capable of adapting and dealing with the appropriate policy to overcome what we have now and what we'll see in the foreseeable future. You know, one other way to point out how the future of healthcare is bright is to point out the fact that at least in the American economy, we have more people working in healthcare today than actually any other sector of our economy. Now, on one hand, that's really exciting in terms of preparing people to become healthcare managers. On another hand, that's kind of scary because our gross domestic product as a country is, for the year 2022, topped $25 trillion. The next largest economy is yours. They're in China at $18 trillion, and the third largest economy is Japan at $4.4 trillion. Well, we as a country spent $4.3 trillion last year on healthcare. And as a percentage of GDP, was close to 20%, not quite at 20%, but close to it. And it does remind us that we spend a great deal of money on healthcare. And so on one hand, as far as workforce development, it tells us that the profession is very bright. But it also tells us from an economic theory standpoint that's a challenging dynamic to come to. In economic theory, there are some advantages to it. We won't get into that, but just understand that there are some advantages to it, but it is a bit scary in terms of raw numbers, because it does remind us for $4.3 trillion, there's a lot of things we should be able to do a lot better than we do. So we do spend a lot of money. I'm not sure we get great return on investment, but that's another conversation for another day. There are things that we do very well. There are also things that we need to improve upon. Anyway, the bigger picture is, you know, what's in store for the future of healthcare management. And then what do managers really need to be able to do and know when they're managing in healthcare. You know, there's two things that we try to prepare students for. Number one, we try to prepare you, the student, to understand the basics of management. How to create a strategic plan, how to understand budgeting and finance. You know, how do you know about this stuff on a real job, and how do you perform in a real environment? You know, again, our aim is to try and prepare you as best we can for that particular eventuality. And so this analytical or conceptual skill is one of the key components of what you need to be able to do to be an effective healthcare manager. And a growth mindset is really about always learning, always wanting to learn, always looking for kind of what that next thing is out there to help you become better than where you are right now. And all of this, we start with a quote from Peter Drucker. Drucker is a principal writer, he's published a number of books, but he's also is an essential read in terms of understanding what modern management is all about. He was the one that wrote, large healthcare institutions are really complex and more complex than they've ever been. And even small healthcare organizations are barely manageable. And, what that also means is the complexity of healthcare makes it a very difficult but an essential skill in terms of developing your management skills, your management potential. Again, do you understand the finances? Do you understand how to read a balance sheet or an income statement? Most people who lead an organization, it's compartmentalized, and so you may not be responsible for managing revenue. You may not see the revenue side of it, but all managers will see their expenses, their operating expense and their manpower expense. And so even in trying to simplify it down for frontline managers, it still can become very complex. And the overall picture of this is healthcare is complicated, and it is complex. There's a lot of interdependencies. There are pieces that have to work together, have to fit together. While this man is no longer our president, one thing he famously said several years ago was, nobody knew that healthcare could be so complicated. It's not exactly true. There were a lot of us that do know healthcare can be so complicated. We just hope our politicians listen to us when we talk about how complex and complicated it is, because it's not just about sound bites or political theater. Anyway, we have a different president today, and he at least appears to be headed in a better direction in terms of understanding the complexity of healthcare. But many politicians who lead countries or lead different parts of our elected structure here in the United States aren't as well versed in understanding the complexity of healthcare. And when they don't, that can be dangerous. And so, it's important that people who lead understand what they're talking about or what they're dealing with. And if they don't, it's important for those around them to teach them, to help them to better understand it. I remind my students all the time, there are a lot of things that we can't change in New Orleans. And we have to know what the rules are, and we have to work within the confines of what those rules are. And sometimes those rules can seem to be a bit cumbersome or outdated. And the reality is we have to do what the rules require us to do. Now, I also remind them, if they ever wind up in state government or in the US federal government, and they have an opportunity to influence policy, give me a phone call. I'll be glad to tell you what I think about different ways we could improve something. But until that happens, this is what we have. We have to deal with the rules that we have, and again, that can be rather complex. You know, I really wish it didn't have to be so complex, but it is. I mean, there's so many complexities to it, from the social interactions to the political force, being sure that we're meeting patient needs, understanding what reimbursement is, how we're paid for the things that we do, and being sure that we have enough revenue coming in to offset the cost associated with doing this. You know, so much of what we do in America is built around capitalism, being sure that, you know, and a part of capitalism is understanding the cost associated with many of these things. But in addition to understanding the cost, there's also an important aspect of being sure we understand how we can pay for it, or how we can deal with it in the context of how it should be dealt with. You know, many of these decisions will affect the lives of others, and so it is important that we understand the complexity of healthcare, but we also understand the personality of healthcare. In most of our businesses, it's very easy for us to reduce items down to operating widgets, so to speak, which is a mythical, non-existent thing that we use to at least to help understand the quantify cost associated with doing something. You know, what I try to remind students in healthcare management, while we still are a business and we have to function as a business, we're vastly different in a way because our widgets have faces and names and families, and we can't dehumanize that. We can't lose our humanity in managing the business. We have to understand that managing the business is essential, but taking care of the patient is also essential. And so there are things that we do in at least the American model of healthcare that's not profitable, because it's the right thing to do. And so again, it's that ethical value of being sure that you know, from a capitalistic standpoint, we understand what it costs, and we understand that we've got to figure out a way to pay for what it costs. But from a social standpoint, we also have to understand the compassion, what we need to do and how we need to do it. You know, in terms of how do we manage when there's such a complex work environment, you know, the best way to help understand this is to think in the context of competency. You know, so let's start with the definition of competency. The ability to use your knowledge to do something versus knowing about it, or to do things for no particular reason. Anyway, the main point is how do we use what we know and to do something? You know, it's really integrating theory and practice. How we use the skills we have and apply that knowledge can certainly be very meaningful. We have to be sure that we're not doing something mindlessly, doing something for no reason at all. We have to know what we're doing and why we're doing it. We also have to understand managing these competencies or mastering these competencies requires our knowledge in terms of how we're going to do this. And again, that growth mindset, thinking about what are things that we can continue to do to keep getting better at what we're doing. You know, I certainly enjoy what I do, but it's also important for me to continue to stay on top of what I do and to continue to look at the amount of information that's out there and look at new ways to present it so that our students stay in front of the competition, so to speak, that they are also the best that's out there as well. You know, it's when you see an iceberg, this is a great example of, what you see is not always what's there. What's there may be much deeper. It may be somewhat transparent to what we see at the surface. It may be much larger than what we see. And so whether we use an iceberg as an example, or the point is, there's a lot that we don't always see in a person or in a patient or a patient's family. There's a lot that we don't always see in the operation and management of a healthcare system. And so it's important for us to be sure that if we're working in the background, that we're the ones doing the things that are necessary to get something done. And as far as these 8 core competencies, let's start out with analytical and conceptual thinking. Again, throughout this week and next week, let's see, time-wise, I think this week, I think anyway, we have 8 sessions, and we'll cover each of these 8 core competencies throughout the remainder of the sessions. Again, today primarily is analytical and conceptual thinking, but I also do want to be sure and point out all 8 of these: knowledge of the healthcare environment, what we know about the environment that we're going to be working in or that we do work in, empathy, understanding the perspective from our patients or from our patients' families in a way that helps us feel what they're feeling, or see through their eyes what they're seeing. Empathy is a very important skill to have. Professionalism is really the way you carry yourself. Are you dressed for the job that you have, or are you dressed for the job that you want? Leadership, I've mentioned before. We first teach you to be a manager, and then hopefully the preparation after that helps to prepare you for leadership. Management is more of a science. Management is more of something that we measure. There's a lot more measurable components to management. Leadership is more of a social skill, and it varies from person to person. Different people need different leadership styles. And so as we go through leadership and we talk about leadership, just understand management and leadership are 2 different things, but very much interdependent on each other. For you to be a good manager, at some point, you've got to become a good leader. But you'll never be a good leader if you don't have good management skills. So both are important. Again, we'll talk about leadership one day, probably next week. Communication is essential. How do we share information with others? Either the way we write, the way we put things in print, the way we send things through email or text messaging, or WeChat. The point is, how our communication works is essential in how we share information. And then teamwork. How do we work together to get something done, to get things achieved or accomplished? And then last but not least, being creative, innovative. And so, from that, so let's begin. Let's look at competency number 1, which deals with analytical and conceptual skills. A big part of this is kind of the big picture. So when we see the big picture, we want to break it down into smaller pieces. Let's look first off at this picture that leads us to the pinnacle of this mountain. If we broke it down into segments, we can better understand each of the parts of what we're seeing, by also being able to focus on what the goal is. If the goal is to reach the top, we also have to focus on where the stairs are. We have to focus on where the handrail is to be able to hold on to the handrail. We also, while there are other things that can distract us, we have to look for ways to avoid being distracted. But a part of that, again, is that that big picture view. What do we see? How do we break it down? How do we understand it? As we examine each of the parts, and what their relationship is to each other, it's a lot easier for us to, again, kind of get back to what the big picture is, because the whole aim is to get to the top of the mountain, so to speak. And we can do that if we can visualize ourselves getting there and we don't get distracted by the things along the way. So let's kind of go through a couple of analytical and conceptual thinking games or exercises, so to speak. So again, when we think about critical skills that we need to have as an effective manager, one of them includes time management. A part of the challenge that we have with time management is there are people that have limitations in their ability to manage time. Most people aren't born with an innate sense of how to manage time. That's a skill that you develop over time. And so as that skill develops, a part of this is also what are key things that we can do to better prepare ourselves for how we manage things through time. You know, sometimes there's a lack of time. Maybe the lack of time, though, is just an excuse for not getting the job done. Maybe the lack of time is the distractions along the way. What are other things that we get caught up doing when we really should have stayed focused on what needs to get done? And then what are the priorities? Have we set the priorities in terms of what do we need to get done and how do we need to get it done? You know, if I'm running behind schedule, and I'm always running behind schedule, why is that? Are we reallocating our time inappropriately? Are we not working hard enough? Are we too distracted? There are a number of reasons why we can wind up being behind in the things that we need to do. You know, just understand that time management is an essential skill. There are certain clinical conditions that people have. One is attention deficit disorder, also known as ADD. And attention deficit disorder can mean, in fact, I heard someone describe it as being time blind. You know, if you know you have that condition, then it's essential that you establish a schedule and stick to your schedule to help force you to stay on time. You know, regardless of what your experiences have been in life, time management will be one of the most important skills that you manage and deliver for the foreseeable future. You know, a fixed mindset is also about what are things that we look forward to, and what are ways that we've learned from things that we've done in the past. You know, that fixed mindset is really about a growth mindset. How do we prepare ourselves for what the future may hold? And then a part of that is how do we prepare ourselves for that? And then that perspective of the world is constantly evolving, constantly changing. And the more we learn and the more we see, the more we understand about where we're going and maybe what's the best way to get there. You know, again, in terms of time management skill, a part of this is developing growth mindset. You know, a part of a growth mindset, first of all, starts with driving out fear, being sure that we're not afraid to take on something new, that we're not afraid to do something that's exciting, and the steps through this include, you know, yes, you are good enough. Have confidence in who you are. Be yourself. Be sure that you see what you know about yourself and what is true, rather than, what everyone knows. Speaking your mind, how do you think about a certain situation? And honestly, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to criticize. Just understand criticism can be seen as bullying. Don't do it in a destructive way. Do it in a suggestive way of how people can improve. If we help someone to get better, then we help both them, and sometimes we help ourselves, but more than anything else, we help them. Being critical can be a negative way to do that, but being critical that's also supportive will help people understand the steps that they can take and they need to take to improve what they're doing. And be great at what you do. No matter what you do, look for ways that you can develop more information, how to better understand what you're doing, and to do it better than you did it yesterday or the day before. Respect yourself. Being sure that you feel good about who you are also helps you feel good about who others are. You can make a difference in the world. Everyone has a personal story, and a part of that personal story is who they are. As a member of any community, seeing others within the community, how we see them also reflects on how we see ourselves. Recognize what we don't know, and then look for ways to constantly improve. The more you know, the more you realize what you don't know. And so there are always gaps in our knowledge. But sometimes the biggest gap in our knowledge is right in front of us. We don't see it just simply because we don't know enough about it. So that growth mindset is omnipresent. It's always there. It's always important. Making conscious decisions on how we understand the world we're living in, how we actively decide to manage and spend our time, and being sure that we understand what's expected of us, and what we expect of ourselves. How do we want our lives to turn out really drives back at how we're pushing our lives forward. Other parts of the growth mindset, sometimes it's scary to do something new, but do that with confidence and don't let fear get in your way. But that also includes how we respect ourselves and how we respect others. And then being sure, again, that growth mindset, that we're always looking for ways to learn, that we're looking for ways to understand more about things that we don't know as much about. And then analytically taking all of the parts and putting them back together in kind of the big picture. In terms of time management and that fixed mindset, a part of this is accomplishment. Do we see the goal? Do we see the steps we need to take to get to that goal? And then, what do we see down the road in front of us? Do we have time to get something done? Do we need to find time to be able to be effective or efficient? And if you have a certain time blindness, so to speak, again, I mentioned people with ADD have a tendency to be what's considered time blind. They don't always have a full understanding of what the deadlines mean and how important it is to meet and achieve those deadlines and meet those goals. Again, what health actually is and analyzing what health is really about understanding the management of the healthcare environment. What are the things that we can do there and how we do those things, again, to be successful. A few minutes ago, I talked about who knew healthcare could be so complicated? It is complicated, but it also comes down to several essential core elements, and that includes how we provide healthcare for others, how we look for ways to be able to fund the things that we're doing, how do we support the patients that we care for that are within our healthcare system, and that we look for ways to constantly grow, both individually and organizationally. Organizationally, we want to continue to grow to meet the needs of our community. Individually, we want to be able to grow to meet our personal needs as well as the needs of our organization. Sometimes personal growth includes changing jobs. Sometimes, you find yourself at a point where, I've done a lot. I've been successful within this organization, and I want to continue to be successful. But sometimes that growth mindset means you need to go somewhere else to continue to grow. Whether it's individually or organizationally, it's being sure that we can imagine what's necessary, being able to analyze what's going on, and being sure that we're doing what's best for our patients, and to some degree our organization and ourselves. So healthcare is not simple. It is complex, but it's also an important aspect of what we're doing for the community that we serve, the hospital that we work in, the people that we work with. And so with that, we kind of wrap it up to get back to our 5 things for today. What is healthcare management? I hope at least now you understand what healthcare management is. And as I said, we'll talk a lot more about leadership later on. Just understand those are not the same words. Management is the science of what we do. It's developing strategies, it's developing policies, it's the functionality, but there's a lot of measurable things in what we do in management. Leadership is more of the social skill of leading others. Your organization can make you a manager, but really it's how you interact with people that over time develop your leadership skills. You need to be good at both. In the academic world, we typically teach you to be a manager, and then once you're a good manager, hopefully there will be opportunities for you to learn to be a good leader as well. But leadership requires, again, leadership is more of a qualitative standard. Management is more of a quantitative standard. And then healthcare management competencies, again, there are 8 key competencies today. We talked about the conceptual and the analytical component, and we also talked about having a growth mindset. Just remember, a growth mindset is essential in where you are today and where you're going down the road as a healthcare manager and a healthcare leader. And with that, I get to questions. Do you have questions today? Hello, Professor Wu. I can't hear you.
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
I'm very delighted to see you tonight. Thank you very much for your lunch of the 8 competencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So,
And I will see you Wednesday. I will see you Wednesday for our next class.
Okay. Next lecture, we will meet in the Putian University.
Okay, I'm having trouble hearing you, but it's good to be in your classroom again, and I do look forward to working with you this week and next week. And anyway, and hopefully we'll be back in Putian this time next year.
Thank you, lady. I will show some students some questions.
No questions.
没有问题吗？不是第一组第二个问题，完全没准备的问题。第一组的就翻译组的那个。Maybe I have the first question. How to think about the healthcare competency between Chinese and American. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You have a good day. Bye-bye, everyone.
What do you think is the difference? What do you think is the difference about 8K content between Chinese and the American? Can you hear me?
Okay,
Okay.
thank you very much. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone. I will see you on Wednesday.
The first time we have healthcare management. So we talk about what do you think about the difference between Chinese and American? Okay.
Okay. So I don't know a lot about the Chinese healthcare system. So it's difficult for me to tell you a lot of differences. The main things that do know in the American healthcare system, in the American model of healthcare, we focus a lot on sick care. If you're sick, if you have a medical emergency, we do that very well. We probably do that as well as anyone in the world. The problem is it's also a very expensive way to do that. What I do know of the Chinese model of healthcare is you spend a lot more effort and energy on preventing disease, and we don't. We should, but we don't. And that's a part of why healthcare costs as much as it does in the US. We don't spend as much as we should, and we don't focus as much as we should on preventing disease and injury. Again, if you have a disease or if you have an injury, we take care of those things very, very well, but that's part of what drives the expense of healthcare in America. Beyond that, I know there's some differences in a Western style of medicine and a more traditional Eastern style of medicine. There are things that scientifically we don't understand in terms of treatments that are native more to not just China, but Asia in general, that aren't exactly some of the same things that we do here in America, although many of those types of practices are available here. Again, I think the biggest difference is we spend far more money, far more amounts of money on healthcare here in America than any other country, and we're not the healthiest country. So I won't say we spend it wisely. I'll just say that we spend it. I do think your focus on well care and your focus on prevention, at least what I know of it, is better than what we do, and I would continue to encourage you to continue to invest money in that fashion. We don't do that as well, and that's something we should do better.
Thank you. 其他同学有问题吗？ Again, students, no question. So let's over the class. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
Bye bye, everyone. I will see you Wednesday.
我们还没下课，我还有半小时。Okay, bye bye.
Bye bye.